Is Cresselia just a worse Deoxys defense, or is it also overpowered? That's the question we seek to answer today. How y'all doing, man? Today, I'm gonna be talking about Cresselia because, as a Pokemon, I think a lot of people would say so far, Deoxys defense has overshadowed it as a much more discussed Pokemon for potentially being too problematic in NU. But we do have some people that are also still talking about Cress and saying, hey, don't forget about this Pokemon. It does largely the same thing. So we're going to do what we always do. We're going to look at some sets. We're going to look at some counterplay. I even have a replay we're going to look at. Shoutouts to Yoshi for posting a very in-depth little post. Posting a post, yes, about Cresselia and why he believes that it is too good. Of course, you enjoy this type of informative content. You enjoy daily uploads of competitive Pokemon. You want to contribute to the NU tier? Woohoo! Make sure, of course, you subscribe. I'm on my way to 10K by the end of the year, and I'm going to keep reiterating for y'all. Big things happening when I hit 10K, so help a brother out. So, as y'all see, I got 3 sets here. The first 2 sets look very similar, except for EVs. And then the last set is a more utility-based set. Naturally, the Calm Mind variants right here are going to be the 2 that you get a lot more discussion about for potentially being too good on Cresselia. But this set at least exists, and so it's worth discussing because it is good utility. So, first up we have Bulky Cresselia, the EVs here, pretty simple. It's just so you have enough speed to outrun the base 60s if they're running a neutral nature. So this is going to be like your max speed Adamant Incineroar and your choice spec Sylveons. Those are, of course, very nice to have. A speed advantage versus Sylveon, it's less relevant because at the very least, you've got, what's it called? Oh, Brain Power firing. You've got Terra, and Steel and Poison are the 2 best options for Terraing on your Cresselia. As long as you resist the Hyper Voice, frankly, you're pretty happy. Incineroar, different story. You want to be faster than it so that you can maybe try and KO it. This is, of course, more relevant for Terra Poison, because Steel Crest is just losing 1v1 always, but it's still useful if you need to maybe like pick it off with a Moonblast. So another EV spread you could do if you want to still be bulky is this variant right here. It's nice because maybe you want to run, or maybe you want to outrun, a Jolly Incineroar. It's not as common, I feel, right now, for instance, to be Jolly. A lot of time if they're running Swords Dance, either they're like specially defensive and then just have Swords Dance for some extra damage output, or they run the more wall breaker oriented EVs, which means you are pumping up your offenses. But they just seem to go Adamant because there's really not a ton that Jolly helps you with. In Sun and Moon NU, there's a bit more reason to run Jolly because you at least get some more Pokemon that kind of like overlap in that speed tier between where you're at Adamant and Jolly. This gen of NU, not so much. So Incineroars often are just getting a little bit more damage and deciding it's good. But if you want to maximize your matchup, of course, running some more speed is going to press. Now, here we've also got a faster Crest. This is giving you speed for the Jolly or plus speed base 80. So think about like Gallade is the really prevalent one. I want to say there's something else too. Shandy, yes. Shandy and Gallade are your 2 big ones. In addition to something like Adamant Toxicroak, which does see increasingly high usage nowadays. Being able to outrun Adamant Croak is really good. Again, we talk about how Poison Terra is, of course, gonna shut down a lot more of Pokemon. Or not even shut down, but just improve your matchup. But if you're running Terra Steel, it is, of course, again, very much like the Incineroar point. It's just good value to be able to outrun that. So that's always worth considering, especially since Toxicroak runs Terra Dark. So maybe you need to be able to pop it with a Moonblast or something. That could be good. Now, as we talk about some little adaptations, of course I mentioned Terra Poison. Basically just means that you keep a little bit more of a similar defensive presence as your base typing. Most of it comes down to the fighting types. Things like Croak, things like Breloom are a little bit scarier if all of a sudden you Terra, and then they like actually beat you. Like, it's not good, especially thinking about how, again, we talked about Croak with Terra Dark. We talked about Breloom in the past, with how Terra Steel is really good on it. So it is important to be cognizant of that, and so it's worth considering Poison. It even makes you have a marginally better matchup against Alolan Muck, because that way, if it's Drain Punch, it doesn't just start hitting you super effectively. I think the reason that I prefer Steel a little more is I find that in general you get a little bit more setup opportunity with Steel. There's more choice lock Pokemon that Steel screws over, so even think about like things like Flygon and Porygon Z. I personally have just found it to be quite nice. Even Monkey Dory, not being weak to Psychic from that, especially as it's a trick user that threatens you. I think that's pretty good. So, I think both are options, but that's why I have Steel as the default. Item option as well. I'm just only going to edit one of these because that, again, the edits apply to both sets, frankly. Key Berry's another good one. Of course, gives you more stored power damage, and since you're boosting up your special defense a lot more than your regular defense, even though this is already incredible bulk, I mean, it's nice. I also, and correct me if I'm wrong, I just don't remember the interaction. I believe Knockoff activates Key Berry. Like, I don't think it removes the bear, I believe it just activates it, so that's pretty cool as well when you factor in the Incineroar and the Alolan Buff matchups. Another option you can go for, Sub. This just gives you, like, incredible room versus any of your checks, because now, I mean, they gotta deal with a Sub. You can run, like, lefties on this as well. It's just, oh my god, Cress Subs becomes very, very annoying to break when you've got all those Combine boosts, and how bulky this mon is with just light investment. Just crisp 40 EVs on here, and it's still one of the most obnoxious physical walls here. You can do Moonboss as well. This is the set I haven't really experimented with at all. This is, like, okay. I'm not a huge fan, but again, since you have Substitute, the need for Terra Steel or Poison goes down, and you can run Mono Moonblast with Terra Fairy. It's just a, like, different look. Helps marginally versus dark types. The big thing with Cress, and as a counterpoint to a lot of the Cress's OP thing that we'll talk about, is Cresselia is just very weak. Base 75 is not good, and so y'all remember when I used Cress. Y'all remember the Incineroar interactions. They were nothing. One point I did actually have against Yoshizilla's point or post was he said that Cress frequently beats Incineroar. I don't think that's true at all. It does not match my experience at all. He may have been talking about, like, the pivot Incineroar, where it's like Will-O-Wisp parting shot. Yeah, Cress can beat that just fine. Swords Dance Incineroar, no. That mon smokes your entire pack. It outboosts you, and it will boost to +6 and then press knockoff. It will not care if you've Terra'd or not. You were taking 500,000. Your Moonblast will not be boosted nearly the same. And even if it were, you don't two-shot. So, congrats. Good mon. And then, I want to talk about this set. Scarf Crest is kind of cool for hyper offense. Now, there's technically some other looks you could take with this too. This one is pure utility, with Lunar Dance being here to help support Pokemon like, say, Cloyster, where potentially you Lunar Dance it back to its Focus Sash. That's really detrimental. We've seen a lot more Cloyster lately since the rise of Slowbro. For Alligator, another good mon, where Gator also has some pretty good just early breaking power, so you can use Gator to wall break for itself early game, and then bring it back later on. That's really useful, of course. Something like an Incineroar, even if you want to run the Power Chip set, maybe you get some chip early, although it's not nearly as good there, but it's still, like, okay, I guess. Flygon, another mon, though, where you've got some defensive use that you may try and get out of it early, and you can Lunar Dance it back. Iron Thorns is another good example. It's just very nice support. Another set, though, that we've seen, I believe it's Stored Power that I've seen mostly, but doing something like this, and then Terra Steel. So the idea with this is I can trick a Scarf onto, say, an Incineroar early on. And that just makes it a lot easier to later on deal with. Incineroar does not have recovery of its own, although Wish Pass is very good, just as an aside. So if you're able to get, like, a trick on it, well, one, now it's going to take Stealth Rock Chip, but two, it also can't Swords Dance versus you, and that's really useful if you're trying to 1v1 it. Even if it, like, knocks you, you lose the boots at some point, you don't really care. You got rid of its boots, and you gave it a Scarf. It is, like, neutered, and this applies as well to Pokemon like Alolan Mug, Pokemon like Umbreon, even, if you want to count that as a check. Wochian. So, very cool value. Even the Steel types don't really want to take that trick. It is a cool angle you can take with Cress, and this is one of the sets that did draw the ire of a lot of people last gen, because, yeah, a lot of its counterplay ends up being passive Pokemon that don't want to be tricked a Scarf. Well, what if you tricked them a Scarf? I mean, that's not counterplay. So, of course, before we get into counterplay here, and we've got quite a good list of Pokemon here, obviously, again, we'll contextualize how they're counterplay and the issues maybe that some of these do have. I want to talk about this replay here. I thought it was a pretty good example, and Yoshizilla gave plenty of replays in his post, but I thought it was a cool one to see how Cress can kind of bullshit through a game if your opponent doesn't manage their resources well. And as you see here, Shingen using a pretty experimental team here. It's hyper offense with some ones you don't really see that frequently, like Scarf Inteleon is still, it's not a bad pick, but it's just not a super common one. Power Trip Incineroar is pretty rare, and you've got Staraptor on HO. And while Yoshi's just got a more called normal looking HO with the spikes, Bramble, Swords Dance Like, and Swords Dance Croak, your standard DD, Flygon, the Calm Mind Crest, and your Tidy Up Chinchino. And as we see here, he actually says he thought this was a misplay on his end. He let off with the Lycanroc here. It's not Stealth Rock, but it is Swords Dance. And you're going to see that the Incineroar Flame charges up to turn 1. This means now it is faster, and he can just easily Earthquake and kill the Lycan. And Yoshi, not respecting the threat, gives this thing a weakness policy. Gets Earthquake, and then he tries to revenge kill with Toxicroak, which unfortunately, this is big Incineroar, baby. So it easily lives that hit. Gets 2 kills early, and it's of course very good. Now, maybe a problem for our hero here, Shingineer, is this is your best Crest counterplay. You have allowed it to get really, really low with this whack trade he took early. Now, I think the logic was still expecting this to be Stealth Rock. That's why he Flame Charged up. He thought Rocks would maybe just be set, or maybe he'd, yeah, I think he just expected Rocks to be set. So unfortunately for him, this is now low. He does get, again, he basically kills 3 Pokemon because the Bramble also gets brought down to a Sash here. The Inteleon is used to revenge kill, as you see here, to build Scarf. But keep an eye on that Cress. Roar's gone. Now he goes Bramble. This kind of counts as Crest counterplay. I mean, at the end of the day, you're Poulter. He misses a Power Whip here, so he has essentially lost his Bramble for nothing. Yoshi will go for a little DD here as now he decides to take his Cress out on his own terms. But the problem with doing this, of course, is the following. With Bramble going down, or even if Bramble were alive, right? Cress's Key Berry here, it doesn't really count as counterplay. Yoshi then wastes his Terra because why not? I thought it was very funny, but here's the Cress. And he goes for Calm Mind. You can see it's a very bulky Cress too, because I think this is Banded Raptor. 52. Now, I might be wrong on this as Scarf, and I want to say I'm wrong, because this just feels like a way too low of damage. Like, let's calc this, right? We go to Cresselia, and we're just going to take the RE bulk online set. I'm a Star No Raptor. That's Scarf Brave Bird damage, bro. This is banded. So this is even bulkier than this set here. This is these EVs are also definitely wrong, right? There's no way you're running 240. I think this is just bad EVing, right? Like, anyhow, I think it's supposed to be this in their cal. I don't know for sure, but anyhow, as you could tell, Yoshi probably running more like what I showed y'all at the start, where it was like 256. Yeah, there you go. So as you can see here, that's where you get that Brave Bird damage coming from. It looks like this is a minimum roll as well, but then the Key Berry comes in. This just can't even do damage now. You're too bulky, and as Chinchino's going to try to come out and tidy up to try to, you know, get a little bit of extra damage, it doesn't matter. Cress is way out of control already. That is 100 base power, sword power, 120 actually, my bad. And with the Key Berry, how do you kill it? So I think this is a good replay to show off, because despite Yoshi making some pretty subpar plays early, at the end of the day, he did enough. He got rid of the Incineroar, and I guess even getting rid of Bramble because it had Curse, maybe that could have been annoying. Like, imagine every turn you see the little Cresselia do the Shudder, because it takes the 25%. So, a little rough, but end result is still a win for Yoshizilla 315, who is somehow still 14 years old. It's very crazy. If you know, you know. But, okay, so what was some counterplay Shingineer could have used on his team? Of course, start off with just some dark types that are generally okay into Cress. The big thing to keep in mind, again, is Moonblast from Cress, without several boosts, often not too big a deal. Brute Bonnet is not nearly as good into Cress as it was into Slowbro, but at the very least, Bonnet can force a Terra out of Cress, and that's really good because, as you'll see later, some of our checks are, frankly, mons that are just saying, okay, I'll make you Terra early, And then I can force you out because you've Terra'd, and then I'm fine. Now, Bonnet also does have the cool little idea of Clear Smog. It's not... I don't love Clear Smog Bonnet at all. But if this is, like, your only Crest counterplay, and maybe you're like a Terra Steel Brute Bonnet, for example, if you really needed to, you could Terra, Clear Smog, and then you don't really lose to Crest ever, because your crunch long-term is going to beat Crest down. Even if it's the last mon. You'll get enough defense drops, you will just do enough damage. Now it ends up being you run a very weird set. You'd have to be something like this, which isn't exactly, overly appealing. Maybe like boots here. You could probably do, you could probably still get away with Cloak, but without Bro in the tier, I don't think it's nearly as useful. So this is definitely a weird set, but I think it could work okay if you don't mind Croak being kind of a problem. You could even drop Sucker Punch if you need, like Stomping Tantrum or CC if you wanted to hit like, other dark types a bit hard. But this technically constitutes Crest counterplay. Incineroar is another great one. I left the EVs blank because, frankly, whatever EVs you go with, whether you're offensive or defensive sword stance, you beat Crest 1v1 100% of the time, or at least 99.9. If you get tricked, yeah, not too good. But that set's not super common and has its own issues with being mono attack and potentially just, you know, you trick the wrong target. If it's like, if I have an Incineroar and a Bronzong on my team, you can only trick one of them. And if you trick the Zong, for example, well, that's going to be worse than if you tricked Incin, because now my Incineroar is just straight up, you have nothing. You could be Moonblast mono attack, but we saw, dude, the Moonblast calcs versus Spadef, SD, Incineroar. You do like 20 at +2. Actually, no, I think that might be offensive Incin. Regardless, you do nothing. You are very weak, very pathetic even, Joey would say. So, great check here. Muck's also a great check. You can have Clear Smog, which struggles more to sub-press, of course, but it's still good into the standard 2 attacks. You can have Haze, which is more generally useful. Cool thing, again, if it's Terra Steel Crest, you could be like Haze 3 attacks even, and you're kind of chilling because, well, the Terra Steel versus you trying to dodge poison. I just Drain Punch you down. I will win this 1v1. Inevitably, you will lose. You will fall to my Muck. So, pretty solid check there. And Wo-Chien, another mon that kind of doesn't love sub-Crest, but of course, if the Crest isn't careful with what like coverage it picks, Wo might just beat it down anyway. We're all Terra Poison Wo-Chien gamers here. So, like, a Dragon's good too, but Terra Poison Wo is very good. So if you're mono Moonblast, well, Terra and beat you. If you're mono Stored Power, I beat you. You know? Wo can be foul play instead of knock. I have knock here just to show off, hey, I mean, if they're lefties, you can knock the lefties, leech seed them. Crest will not be able to beat you down. If you're facing 2 attacks Crest, it's mostly just a matter of Moonblast from Crest needs a lot of boost to actually start doing damage. Wo-Chien, even if you're like physically defensive, which is what I like, shout out Shinjineer for putting me on. This is enough special bulk. Like, Crest needs a lot of boost. Again, I can't emphasize enough. A lot of Crest counterplay comes down to the fact this mon is so laughably weak, and as a result, you do get more turns than normal versus it compared to some other mons, like, say, Slowbro. Where Slowbro is not only pretty naturally strong, I think it's over base 100, or at least base 100 regardless. Something like Slowbro where it's pretty strong, and yet has Scald as well to just add on to its lack of passivity. And I could say take away from its passivity. So Pokemon like Wo-Chien that, yeah, I mean, you're still threatened by a move, technically. It's not as bad as it would be otherwise. Bronzong, another mon. This is because you literally could set up alongside Cresselia. The funniest thing about it, too, Cress at +6, you know, full Calm Minds, it doesn't even 2-shot Zong. Even if you don't have lefties, which is very funny. This also means this is naturally actually counterplay. If you want to use Bronzong as Crest counterplay, Toxic Orb Trick is very fair. This is a set we saw a little bit in Sword and Shield NU. Back then it was Iron Defense, Body Press, Trick, and then you ran coverage usually, but you could still run rest regardless of that. Bronzong can run this Trick Orb set, and Crest is probably not terastallizing versus a Bronzong. Keep in mind, again, common Terra types are Steel and Poison. If you Terra into a Poison type, I outdamage you with Stored Power very easily now. Terra into a Steel type, my Body Press sends you into the Shadow Realm. So, very likely you can actually get that Trick Orb off. You'll see more about Trick later on, of course. So, This is combining two sets here. I know this is not the set I'm saying you should run. This is talking about Demon Bronzong technically is fine into Cress because you, again, you're too resistant. And you have two good attacking moves, so you should be okay in the PowerPoint war. Crits can naturally mess it up, but it's still pretty good at making Cress waste a lot of turns, maybe make it waste its Moonlights, etc. Raja's here. Kind of fails as a check if Cress is the last spawn, but at the very least it's fine in the early game, mid game. You can knock the lefties, and you can just phase it out if it's trying to boost. It's not going to do enough damage to you because it's a Cresselia, so pretty decent stopgap answer as you try and just navigate the early stages of the game, maybe put yourself in a position to set up with something of your own and just counter sweep. Klefki, again, switcheroo, plenty viable of an option. We can also talk about Klefki's demon set here, where it's cool. So you have Draining Kiss, so this is a bit different from Bronzong, of course, where you actually have recovery. You still check Cress okay, but maybe not as good because you don't have stab on stored power, but this is definitely a viable answer as well. Both sets can take it on, and Trick Orb. Once again, Cress is just unlikely to Terra versus a Klefki unless it has that confirmation earlier that you have the switcheroo. Now we talk about just Trick more generally speaking. So like Shandy's nice too because it naturally offensively threatens Cress. But having Trick, being able to throw a Scarf or a Specs on is pretty good. Monkey Door is cool. Because again, just like every other Pokemon, since Cress is so weak, Monkey could actually like hard switch into Cress and be pretty chill. And so you have Trick as an option to try and throw off and cripple it. Cress has to respect that, so maybe it switches out. And if Cress gets greedy, you think they'll switch and you U-turn, well, hey, they didn't Terra, you might get that Toxic Chain poison on them, and then that's really bad for the Cress. PZ as well. Just another mon where like, yeah, you've got Trick. If Cress isn't boosted enough, you don't necessarily really care. But also, I mean, you're Scarf, so you'll be faster. Now here we got some more defensive options. Roar Sylveon, good mon. Helps a lot in the meta right now in general because there's a good amount of bulky setup. Sylveon can just phase some stuff out. Tentacruel is another option where, I mean, you can throw Haze on it. And Terra Steel's a fine option on it. It's okay enough, at least, in my eyes. So, just again, another nice stopgap answer. You're not permanently answering Cress. Well, if you're Terra Steel, you might be. But not as well as Vaporeon. Vaporeon's like a genuinely really good Haze answer to Cress, just because you will outstall it long term. I can throw off all the Scalds I need as well. I can fish for a burn. Cress just does not have the same luxury. I've also got Wish as my recovery, which is pretty cool. Roar is another option. Is just, again, Haze is going to probably be a little bit more reliable because you can still spam Haze as Cress is the last mon. If you're Terra Dark as well, you shut down Mono Stored Power Cress. That's really helpful. And then the last spot I actually have it here is Gallade. Now, this is partly because, again, Gallade runs Terra Dark very frequently. So if Cress is Mono Stored Power, well, you got that going for you. But as we've seen lately, Crit Gallade is pretty good. Gallade in general is, so you don't necessarily even have to be this set. But Gallade can muscle through Cress. If they're the bulky set, you could, like, Swords Dance up, Terra Dark if you need. Cress needs to have, like, a ton of boosts to reliably make it for you. And, like we mentioned with some of these mons earlier, Gallade benefits particularly uniquely from its dual stab murking the common Terra types of Cress. So, that's also really good. So there you have it. There is your how to use Cresselia guide and how to also avoid death and despair into Cresselia. I hope you all enjoyed. Of course, let me know down below. What are your thoughts on Cresselia so far? You found it to be a little too overbearing? You think it's okay? You think it's, just another strong sweeper? Curious to hear your opinions, because I'm still trying to develop my take on Cress. I definitely feel the issue of, like, DOD is better, at least in my opinion. So I don't really know what to make of Cress. But, hey. We'll see what happens. I think the big defining difference between Cress and DOD, and why I think Deoxys is better, and if anything, I'd say to ban Deoxys, and then see where Cress ends up. DOD has a lot better of a time beating some of your checks. So Taunt is actually pretty huge. You can taunt something like a Lolamuck, and then it can't haze you anymore. You also can taunt Incineroar and prevent Swords Dance. You actually prevent a lot of the counter setup that is seen here, and even some passive counterplay like Haze. So You'll notice also, I didn't actually really talk about Encore as counterplay. That does count. I should have thrown Encore Screamtail in here, so imagine that it's here. But, okay, let's talk about Encore Screamtail versus DOD. I have Pressure. So, Pressuring Screamtail is actually pretty significant, because in long-term, Scream doesn't really like dealing with you. Pretty tough. You only get 4 Encores versus a Dio. You get 8 still versus Cress. So it's little things like that. Cress also doesn't have Nightshade, which is just very consistent damage. So you could be Cosmic Power, Stored Power, Nightshade, Recover, DOD. It's just easier to make progress versus some of these mons. Whereas Cress has to rely on getting a ton of boosts because of how naturally passive it is, even with Calm Mind. So that's where I stand right now, but I hope y'all enjoyed. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time. Peace.